and specialized medical attention. Now, her third piece of evidence indicates that oppression is going on now. The first answer to that is oppression isn't a viable policy framework. You would look to more substantiated figures first. And the second is, remember, we must fight societal stereotypes before we can enact a policy. That's the long-term prudent approach that I am advocating. And off of her final argument, the first answer is, remember, there's infinite alternate causalities for privacy violations. Cutting somebody's umbilical cord or preventing them from having kids by castrating sex offenders is just one example. The second argument is that categories are key to extending rights. That was explained in cross-examination, that we need to categorize them in order to viably give them rights under the Constitution. And the final argument is, remember, the alternative is worse. Every piece of evidence indicates that these people would eventually have a sex change anyway. However, they would be so traumatized by the fact that they were abused by society, plan would never solve. Now, although I don't have all the long-term keys, I'm proposing observation 1, that the privacy of welfare recipients continues to be violated. A. Wyman v. James requires invasive home visitations for those who receive welfare, failing to extend Fourth Amendment rights to the poor. Luna, Deputy District Attorney, February 1999, in the Duke Law Journal. In Wyman v. James, the court held that welfare recipients could be required to submit to suspicionless home visits by social workers in order to maintain their seat of benefits. Welfare recipients are insulated from the political process and frequently members of racial minorities. Such an invasion into the sovereignty of the home is also unjustified under the individual rights model. It is the precincts of the home that the Fourth Amendment protects, argued Justice Douglas in his Wyman dissent. It is important to the lowly as it is to the mighty. Observation 2, home visits entrench poverty and exclude the poor from constitutional protections. A, home visits put the lives of welfare recipients in public eyes. History proves visits are used to search for evidence and remove assistance, not for the provision of services. This is Lois P. Scheinfeld, attorney for Legal Aid of Society of San Mateo County, 1969, in an amicus curiae brief to Wyman v. James. The impersonal search conditions dangerous to health and safety cannot be compared to a home visit. The welfare recipient and whole way of life is open and subject to examination. The home visit is not impersonal, as shown in Parrish v. Municipal Court. The home visit is aimed at the discovery of evidence of crime and evidence leading to welfare assistance forfeiture. B, finally, a constitutional right to privacy must be applied to the poor. Our failure to seek this justice excludes millions from the Constitution and undermines freedom, providing you the best policy framework in which to evaluate the round. Bendich, Associate Professor of Speech at University of California, Berkeley, 1966, in the California Law Review. Poverty is thus simultaneously a condition which deprives individuals of freedom and dignity and undermines the most fundamental constitutional guarantees. Persons in our society have a constitutional right to privacy and to conditions which are indispensable to its realization. For the millions of Americans who are poverty-stricken, this approach means invoking the whole range of fundamental rights and principles and insisting that the Constitution be taken seriously, not only for the privileged, but for the underprivileged as well. The ultimate conclusion is that the war against poverty is not a war to rescue the poor, so much as it is a war to defend the constitutional principles of freedom, dignity, and equality. It isn't a matter of charity, but of justice. A long-term justice, the medicine that we need right now. Thanks.
Contention 1 card, your subpoint A, it says that the federal government currently has the ability to conduct these invasive searches, correct?
Right.
Right. Is it random, or is it as per the federal government's deemed necessity, i.e., they have some sort of reason or warrant to go into these?
That evidence indicates that every person receiving welfare is subject to suspicionless home visit. It can happen to anybody.
It's under the federal government's jurisdiction is what you're implying then.
Right, and they use it to justify any sort of home visit. That means even if they don't do the home visit.
But it must be deemed within their jurisdiction first, which you're contending it is, and they have to have some sort of reason.
Did. That's correct.
What does your inherency evidence indicate are the reasons why the federal government might possibly go and conduct these searches?
The reason they do the search is they feel they have a social responsibility to make sure welfare programs are working.
Particularly
they try to pull people off of welfare because of various reasons. A lot of people don't like the welfare policy.
So their at least intent on face is to actually benefit the people who are the recipients of welfare.
It's to hurt the recipients of welfare. They look for evidence of crime.
You're
they try to pull people off.
You're contending that the federal government always has an obligation towards these welfare recipients to make sure that they eventually get off of welfare status and that their socioeconomic position in society improves by these
but the Scheinfeld evidence subsumes that because it indicates the reason the federal government conducts home visits.
So because the federal government can justify its search under any circumstances, it's actually disadvantageous for those recipients, correct?
Definitely.
Okay. What's the actual invasion of privacy? Just that they're actually going through the house and that they're searching?
The last piece of evidence in the Scheinfeld evidence indicates that the home is the precinct of the Fourth Amendment, that Suspicionless home visits are the
So just the act of the federal government knocking on the door and then ransacking somebody's house per se might be a violation of privacy is what your argument is. Right. But there's no substantial harm that might be done to the person who's actually being invaded.
The harm is that not only does it invade their privacy, but it excludes the poor from the
is there any sort of...
It justifies economic action.
Is there any sort of physical or mental harm that goes on besides a potential minimal and violation of privacy?
I'm sure there is. I mean, I didn't substantiate.
But on face, the most important thing is to preserve the person's privacy and not conduct these searches.
Right. We need to protect them under the Fourth Amendment. Our failure to do that justifies all sorts of abuse against them.
In Fox Network's latest sensationalistic show, Temptation Island, couples are tempted to follow a false path of iniquity by attractive members of the opposite sex. Although Biddish's analysis may demonstrate surface appeal, we must not judge a book only by its cover. The negative policy position is that not only do walkthroughs by the federal government require the person who's living in the household's consent, but not only these walkthroughs are actually beneficial for a variety of reasons. Initially, Goff's contention 1, subpoint A argument, is that actually invasive privacy violations of going through people's houses are actually happening now. First of all, nowhere in the card does it indicate that all welfare recipients are actually being violated in this manner, meaning the federal government isn't justifying its action or jurisdiction to go through a person's house that they're giving welfare money to under any circumstances whatsoever. It's not actually happening to all the welfare recipients. Secondly, it's actually justified in the federal government's eyes. If they're going to actually conduct some sort of search in which they actually go through a welfare recipient's home, it has to be some sort of reason which they can justify as to why this must be done, meaning there's some sort of fraudulent charge against them or potentially some sort of safety hazard that is going on in the house. And thirdly, consent walkthroughs do not violate the Fourth Amendment. It actually requires the recipient's consent. This is the Luna, Deputy District Attorney, San Diego, Pepperdine Law Review, 1997. The consent walkthroughs with and only with the voluntary consent of the welfare recipients, these investigations respect residences to ensure eligibility for public assistance. His contention 2 argument, subpoint A, says that the lives of welfare recipients are actually in the government's eye. First, remember, they're always going to be justified under the federal government's interpretation of what constitutes a justified invasion of privacy and what constitutes safety for the national public, meaning they're always going to only search somebody's house if they have some sort of underlying reason that protects the safety of the public at large. Secondly, walkthroughs actually help combat abuse. So says Luna, Deputy District Attorney, San Diego, and Pepperdine Law Review, again in 1997. Most information confirming or contradicting eligibility is obtained by walkthroughs. Consent walkthroughs often uncover children living in dangerous or unsupervised conditions. Investigators have found youngsters with nothing to eat. Others have found young children left alone for hours on end. Thirdly, his subpoint B argument is that the constitutional right to privacy must be applied. First, remember, again, voluntary consent must be given, as my second card on subpoint A says, that the person who's actually been searched must give their voluntary consent to the federal government that allows them to initially even carry out these searches, otherwise they can never exist. And secondly, fighting for efforts to slow welfare fraud risks a political backlash that would eliminate welfare altogether. Luna previously cited Pepperdine Law Review 1997. Instead of blasting proposals to address, critics should be embracing efforts to eliminate it. First, welfare fraud takes money away from those who truly need assistance.